those of you who don't know me, my name is Alyssa Bart. I'm a junior here, and I'm studying biology and Spanish. So before I start telling you about my experience in Guatemala, I'm going to give you a brief history on Guatemala just so you can have a better understanding of the people that I was working with. Guatemala had a 30-year civil war that ended in 1996. And during this time, 150,000 to 200,000 people were either disappeared or missing. And so this created a lot of tension, and still 19 years later, we see the effects of the disrest between the government and the people, and the Mayan people with the Mestizo people. So that's one big area. There's also a lot of government corruption in Guatemala, so you have to deal with that when you're working with different people. The government corruption has led to high amounts of poverty. 7 out of 10 indigenous people are living in poverty. And the World Bank has estimated that the average income for the lower class is about $1,600 a year, which breaks down to about $4 a day. But if you look at people who live in more rural villages, they estimate that 13% of the people live on $1 a day. So you also have a lack of education in Guatemala. They do offer both public and private education. The public education is free tuition-wise, but you have to still pay for your uniform, your books. You have to pay for any activity that the school has. It's not optional. So for many families, it's easier to say, well, my kids just aren't going to go to school because they can work on the farm, or I can put them in the streets to sell stuff. And that will bring us more money than what we'll put into education. So 50% of females have no education, and 33% of males have no education. So why did I choose Guatemala? My first time in Guatemala, I was in 8th grade. That's me, 8th grade. And I went there for 1 week to do a mission trip working in different schools and orphanages, and I absolutely fell in love with Guatemala and the idea of doing missions. I always knew I wanted to go into medicine, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. So on this trip, I just learned that it would be really cool to be able to work with Hispanic people and in Guatemala. I went back to Guatemala my senior year of high school. I lived there the entire year. I worked in an orphanage and a women's shelter for abused and battered women. And working in the women's shelter really taught me a lot about how much I have a passion for helping women and doing women's ministries. So I started looking more into obstetrics and gynecology and working in that area in the future, and just being able to be a resource for women and empowering them. Guatemala is very male dominant, so men lead the culture a lot and set the standards and basically do what they want. So helping to empower women was really laid on my heart. And so I knew that I wanted to go back to Guatemala and I wanted to do work there, but I also knew that being able to do that would require me to be able to speak Spanish really well and to understand their healthcare system. So I decided I wanted to go there. So how I got to Guatemala, when I transferred to Spring Arbor University, I went to the cross-cultural office because I knew they had a semester abroad to Guatemala and I wanted to do it. So that was the first thing I did, and I signed up for the first semester I could go, which was this spring of my sophomore year. So in terms of cost, I paid normal tuition. It didn't cost me anything extra. I used my CCS benefit early, so I didn't have to, it covered all of my travel expenses through the normal semester. I did stay through June, so my May term stuff I set up on my own, and I organized the cost for that, and I paid for that out of pocket, and also the credits that I did. Credit-wise, I did 23 credits in 6 months. So I did 10 credits of Spanish language, 6 credits of a Spanish practicum, 3 credits of a biology practicum, and then Core 274, 275. So where I live, the first part with the semester abroad, you live in Antigua, and that's with the SAU Guatemala. So I was there January through May. I lived with a host family through La Union, which is the Spanish school that Spring Arbor uses. So that's a picture of me with my host family and then my parents and brother when they came down to visit me. This is just a few pictures of my house. Antigua is very colonial. It's very touristy, so you're safe. And so that's my bedroom. I had a really nice room. I lived with one other SAU student, but I had my own room, so that was nice. I was the only greenhouse in all of Antigua, so if I got lost, I could find my way home. And then the bottom picture is just of the living room, and they have a really unique setup for their houses because the middle of the house is open to the outside, so you can sit in the living room and sit in the sun, or you can sit in the living room and get rained on. It just sort of depends on the weather. Few more pictures of my house. The bottom one is just where we could do laundry. I paid $3 to use the $3 to use the washer, and then I could hang up my clothes to dry them, or I could hand wash them for free. It just sort of depended on what I felt like doing. The top picture is of a typical lunch that I had. I loved all the food. You eat a lot of rice, a lot of beans, a lot of eggs, and chicken. So if you like those foods, you're basically set to go. They just do it with different sauces and a ton of fruit. There's only one dish that I didn't like, and it was called chipiline. It was like a green leaf in water soup, and I thought it tasted, I just felt like a dinosaur when I would eat it because you're like chewing on leaves. So I called it dinosaur soup, and people laughed at me. But the picture that most of you are probably a little bit confused on is the shower head, and that is electrical. So they don't have like hot water where you turn on the faucet and you're like, yay, hot water. Like, no, you have to run the water through an electric shower head so that it can heat it. So few tips: don't touch the shower head if you go. I learned that the hard way. Also, if you want hot water, you have low pressure, so you don't wash the shampoo out of your hair. Or you can turn on the pressure and have cold water. So you sort of battle the whole time to figure out how to take a shower. The end part of my trip, I lived in Xela, Guatemala, which is the second biggest city in Guatemala. It's where I lived my senior year of high school. So I was there May through June, and I lived with a missionary friend that we had met when we went down there my senior year of high school. So this is a picture of their family. And Xela is very different from Antigua. It's not touristy at all. You don't go out at night. You don't walk by yourself. There were 5-ish American families when we were there, so there's not a lot of white people, especially not white teenage, high school, college girls, so you have to be really careful. And also in Xela, they turn off the electricity randomly all the time. And when they turn off the electricity, you have no water, you can't flush toilets, you can't shower, you can't wash dishes. And they would do that for 2 days at a time, which is weird. But anyway, so Spanish school is something that I did in Antigua. I did 10 credits of Spanish language. Spanish school is required if you go through the SAU Guatemala semester. You have to do at least 3 credits, so 3 weeks. It's set up so that you are one-on-one with a tutor. This is my tutor, Patty. And you have 4 hours a day, 8 till noon. And you talk and you do grammar and you just learn all about the language. My tutor and I, we would go shopping in the market. We would cook dinner. We would go to restaurants and cafes and just hang out. So it's really a great relationship that you have. It's not like sitting in a classroom where you're like, oh my gosh, 4 hours talking to someone. Like, it goes by really fast. And the nice thing about Spanish school is that it's one thing to know like words in a language. It's one thing to know, like, I know how to use this tense and this tense. It's another thing to actually talk to someone and have a conversation. And I knew that when I got to the hospital, I was going to be only speaking with Spanish speakers, and I was going to have to be able to communicate back and forth. So it was very helpful for me to have the Spanish language experience. During my free time, in Antigua, you have a lot of free time. So, because you're only in Spanish school for at least 4 hours, at least 3 weeks. So you have all afternoon to do what you want. There's a lot of cafes in Antigua, so I would oftentimes go to a cafe and get coffee or lemonade or something just to drink and enjoy being with people and meeting people from all around the world. You could also go to the market and get elotes locos, which is crazy corn. So it's corn with ketchup, mayo, and like a crumbled cheese on it, which sounds really disgusting, but it's my favorite treat, and I ate it all the time. And then another nice thing about living in Guatemala is that there's volcanoes everywhere, and there's also earthquakes, so you get to experience the occasional earthquake, but you also get to look at all the volcanoes, and a lot of them are active, so they'll be puffing and doing things on occasion. But when I was there, the volcano actually erupted and like sent ash all over the city. And so the picture on the bottom is of like the sky like shortly after it erupted. And then the picture right next to that of me and my roommate Maria is when like a week later I had breathed in so much ash that I had gotten an infection in my lungs and my ears and my nose, throat, and I had like such bad pressure in my ears I couldn't walk straight down the road because like of all the pressure. And we were running around in Antigua trying to find a doctor who spoke English. because I couldn't communicate what was wrong with me in Spanish. And so that's always a fun part of just living abroad and being able to embrace the culture, and people were laughing at us and I couldn't walk, and it's one of my favorite memories, even though I felt terrible. So tourist activities with Core 275, you get to do all the things that like the May term trip would do. So a few of my favorites was going to Tikal, which is the top picture, which is the Mayan ruins. So it's a day trip. You fly out to Tikal, and then you go and visit the park, and then you fly back to Antigua, or Guatemala City, and then go to Antigua. Another one of my favorite trips was to Lake Atitlan, which is it's a lake in Guatemala surrounded by volcanoes. And so you get to go out in the lake, and you get to visit a place where they teach you how to weave. You get to make your own scarf and bring it home, which is just really, really cool. You see all that stuff in the market, and you're like, oh, that's cool. Like, I don't want to pay that much for it. Can I have it cheaper? And then you go and sit here for 4 hours and make your own scarf, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I will pay you however much you want for a scarf. Like, I'm not making one again. But it was a lot of fun. And then the bottom picture is from Semana Santa, which is Holy Week, which is a big celebration in Antigua in the spring semester for Easter. And so that's a picture of me and a friend from La Union, and we made, they take sawdust and they paint it, and then they make carpets on the road for the processions to walk over. So that was one of the big events that I got to participate in. One of the biggest things that I did in Guatemala in my time in Antigua was work at a malnutrition hospital. It's called Casa Jackson. It's a part of Nuestros Ahijados, which is the God's Child Project. And so this project, they have psychology clinics, dental clinics, medical clinic, the malnutrition hospital, a school. They build houses. They have a feeding center. Basically anything that you can think of to help the community to grow, to thrive, and to be a healthier place for children to grow up. So I worked there, and malnutrition in Guatemala is very popular. It's estimated that 49% of students are malnourished, and then if you go into an indigenous area, it's estimated that 80% of the children in an indigenous region will be malnourished. So at the malnutrition hospital, we're not just like, we're always busy. There's always kids waiting to come in, but we're also fighting the idea of the poverty that we talked about and the lack of education that we talked about. 50% of kids also die from infectious diseases such as malaria, pneumonia, diarrhea, and the measles, which can be treated if you have better nutrition and medical resources. So we try to educate the parents and try to help them to understand what their kids have and what are warning signs of different diseases and things like that. So it's a way bigger issue than just like, oh, this baby needs food, like let's feed it. But we sent one baby home a couple of weeks after I got there, and then we found out a month later that the baby had passed away because she got diarrhea, and her mom didn't know what was wrong, or like thought it would go away on its own, and she ended up passing away because she just dehydrated herself so much from having diarrhea for a week. So, and that's very, very common. So what I did at the malnutrition hospital, I typically spent anywhere from 4 to 12 hours there at a time. 12 hours was optional. You don't have to spend 12 hours there. I just didn't like to go home at the end of the day, so I stayed. But my jobs included feeding, bathing, dressing, cleaning, anything you can possibly imagine that needs to happen in a home with lots and lots and lots of kids who are sick. The kids are eating like every 2 hours because they're malnourished, and a lot of them are infants, and we're giving them bottles. And if we're not giving them a bottle, we're giving them baby food, and so you're doing dishes and you're cleaning up puke in between meals because they're not used to digesting the food, and so they throw it up quite often. And like bath time was one of my favorite times. They don't have like a bathtub, so we bring out 10 plastic tubs. You run outside, get water, heat it up on the stove, run up the stairs, dump it in the bathtub, give the baby a bath. So it's quite the process, and I just love helping the babies. Like, you would get them to splash in the bathtub, and then the moms would get mad because the next time they'd bathe them, they'd get splashed and they didn't want to get wet. But it was one of my favorite times. And also with loving and stimulating the kids. These kids are very behind developmentally. A lot of them can't sit up, they can't hold their heads up, they don't respond when you talk to them, or they don't smile. And so just like laying them on the ground and kicking their feet and talking to them and we put mirrors in their cribs so that they could look at themselves. And if you couldn't, because there's only 2 or 3 nurses there, 15 kids, and sometimes only 2 or 3 volunteers. So you don't have enough people for one-on-one interaction with these children. And so to make sure that they could still interact when they didn't have anyone interacting with them. So I'm just going to share a few stories of like kids that I fell in love with and like stories of their recovery. So the first one is Marcos. He's 2.5 years old. He had been at the hospital for a few months before I got there, but he was learning how to walk. Learning how to walk is something that kids in the States do between 9 and 18 months of age, and so he's 2.5. He's quite a bit behind. The average kid in the States will start walking around 1 year. So he is about 1.5 years behind, but here's a video of his very first few steps that I captured one day when I was there. If you just want to like watch his legs. So there he was, his very first steps. And then just 2 weeks later, after receiving a lot of nutrition, a lot of love, a lot of encouragement, here he is walking 2 weeks later. But that video just shows you that like these kids come so far in such a short amount of time, and that really made every day worth it. To be able to see them make progress and to grow made the hard days so much better because you knew that what you were doing was valuable. Another little girl that I worked with, it was Ingrid. She was 8 months old. She weighed around 12 pounds. When she first came in, she did not want to eat. She didn't want anything to do with anyone. So feeding her always took 3 to 4 people holding her down, syringe feeding her, and she'd spit it all out. She'd throw it up. But one week, a nurse from the United States came down. She's a pediatric nurse, and she just spent hours on end working with Ingrid, holding her, comforting her, and slowly feeding her. And at the end of the week, that nurse's very last shift, Ingrid took her bottle willingly, and it was absolutely incredible. And after that, she just started to grow and thrive, and so here she is being happy, and she normally was always smiling, and she had no teeth, so it was always really, really cute when she smiled. But she was always a joy to work with and to be able to feed. Another kid was Christian. He was in the same condition as Ingrid in terms of not wanting to eat. We had to hold him down. We had to force feed him. But he was way worse off developmentally and physically. He was 1.5 years old, and he was around 12 pounds as well. He could not hold his head up. He couldn't hold his hands up. His legs were completely limp. If you picked him up and sat down in a rocking chair, whatever position you were in, his body would form to. So no matter if you put him over your shoulder, he would just hunch over your shoulder. So he had no muscle tone. The picture on the left for you guys is of his mouth, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's little white blisters all over his tongue. And those we actually found out were because his mom gave him really hot bottles and did not realize that they were too hot. And so they just scorched his mouth, which we believe contributed a large amount to why he wouldn't eat on a regular basis, because eating was very painful. So we had to work through that. We had to get him past the point of not wanting things touching his mouth. So after watching the one nurse with Ingrid, I asked the nurses at the hospital if I could work with Christian. And they're like, you're not going to be able to do it. He's not going to sit for you. And the first few days were awful. He would spit all over me. I'd be covered in throw up and baby food. But by about 2 weeks in, he would willingly allow me to squirt milk on the back of his tongue, where he didn't have that many blisters. And that's the picture on the right. of him 2 weeks in, just willingly opening his mouth, and I would sit with him for 4 hours to give him 4 ounces of a bottle, just to get him to take it willingly and not throw up at the end of the bottle. But 2 weeks after I got him to start eating, he got really sick, got dehydrated, and he regressed a lot, and so we had to give him an IV to hydrate him. But his veins were really fragile, so they kept collapsing. So I kept giving him more IVs, but each time I'd give him an IV, it would take him 6 to 7 tries, sometimes 8 or 9. And so he would just get poked and poked and poked, and he'd scream and scream. His hands and feet were covered in bruises from him trying to do this. And they did that for about 3 weeks, that we just couldn't get him to progress. But today I took this picture from a volunteer who's at the hospital still right now. And this is her picture of him just a couple weeks ago. And he is sitting up on his own. He has hair color. Like in the previous picture, his hair is like super blonde. But here it's dark brown. He's eating on his own, and he's starting to grow now. So like while I was there, and it was really hard to work with him and just leave knowing that he wasn't thriving and that he wasn't making progression, and it seemed so worthless to put all these hours into force feeding him and watching him cry and throw up. Looking at this picture now, it just like makes every moment of that worth it, knowing that he's doing better. It's just really amazing. Overall low for working at the malnutrition hospital is you are with very, very sick kids every single day. And you have to see them suffer, you have to see them try to grow, even though they don't understand what's wrong with them. They don't know why you're forcing food down their throats. They don't understand why you're giving them vitamins and medicine. But just a few examples so you can see how sick the kids are. The first baby on the right is Alicia. She's a 1.5 years, 12 pounds. And the diaper that I have on her chest there is a size 3 diaper, which this is a size 3 diaper. So that covered her entire torso. And she's a 1.5 years. Most kids in the States wear a size 3 if they're between 17 and 28 pounds. And a child in the 50th percentile will hit 17 pounds around 7 to 9 months. So she's very far behind most kids. The baby in the middle is Joel. Him and his twin sister Madeline were at the hospital. They were 4 months old and weighed 4 pounds. That's a preemie diaper on him. And it hung. It didn't like close all the way. I mean, it was huge. We had to like put extra clothes around it just to wrap it around to hold them tightly. So this was Joel and Madeline's diapers. And then the baby on the left is Mario. He was a 1.5 years. He's in the same state as Christian physically. He could not sit up. He couldn't hold his hands up. He couldn't do anything. Like you can see how limp his hand is. It just would lay there if you put it there. But when he came in, he didn't know how to suck on a bottle. So, you know, we cut a hole in the nipple and we were trying to it would just pour into his mouth. But once he figured out how to suck on the bottle, we actually had to learn to take the bottle away from him because he would suck it so hard he'd like deflate the bottle because he would just eat and eat and eat and eat. And then he would scream if you took his bottle away. Here's another little girl. I don't know her name. She was only at the hospital for a few days before she got really, really sick and had to go to the national hospital in the city. But she was a 1.5 years. She also weighed around 12 pounds. So you can just see, like, looking at her armpits and her rib cage and her legs, how you can see the muscles, or not the muscles, sorry, like just the fragileness of her body. Her stomach is distended, but that's not because she's healthy and doing well. She had parasites that we know of. So she was very, very sick. When you would hold her, you literally felt like you were going to break her in half. You'd like go to change her diaper and she would just like scream because she was in so much pain just from you like lifting up her legs to put a diaper on her. This next picture is from when my family was in Guatemala my senior year of high school. And this just gives you a perspective of the growth that kids don't have when they are malnourished. So the boy on the right, is my brother. He's 13 years old. And then the little boy in the middle is Luis, who is also 13 years old. So they are the same age. My brother is well-nourished and growing. Luis was not well-nourished. The little girl behind Luis is my sister, and she's 10. So massive just these kids are not growing. They are not healthy. Luis actually went home to his uncle because his parents weren't able to take him back. And then shortly after going home, they found him at his house in the same condition he came in on the first time because his uncle didn't take care of him either. So it's a continual battle that they're fighting every single day at the hospital. But overall, it was an absolutely incredible experience. I wouldn't change it for anything. It was difficult to work with sick kids. It was hard to see them suffering, but you had so many moments that were just filled with joy that it overcame all of those hard days, all those days where you were covered in puke or you just, all the kids were crying. No one wanted their bottles. These moments made that all worth it. When Diego would scoot across the floor with both of the balls that we had, and he wouldn't let any other kids touch them because they were his, even though we only had 2 balls for all 15 kids. Or when Angel and Christopher wanted me to push them on a chair around the floor of the hospital for hours on end, and I couldn't stand up at the end of the day because my back hurt so bad from pushing them. Or when they gave me kisses at the end of my shift before I went home. Those moments were just really, really special to me. I'm going to show you a video here. At the end of my shift, I would have the nurses turn on music, and we would let the kids sort of dance and calm down in their cribs while we try to clean up dinner, get the last few diaper changes done. And so you can see the few kids dancing. Some of them don't dance, and there's an awkward pause where no one's dancing. But then Ingrid is dancing at the end, and she can't sit up. So that's why I'm going to play it all the way through, even though there's an awkward pause. That's Marco, sorry. So even though Ingrid couldn't sit up and dance, she would always move her head to the music, and it always made me laugh because she was dancing even though she couldn't use her whole body. But now I'm going to sort of transition into what I did in Shayla, and I'm going to quick talk about free time because it's maybe 1% of what I did. If I wasn't at the hospital, I was either sleeping, trying to recover, or emailing Dr. Wyman, trying to process my thoughts of everything that had happened that day. But like I said, Shayla's not like Antigua at all. So I couldn't go out at night. I couldn't, just go to the market by myself. So the family that I lived with, their kids were in soccer and gymnastics. So I would go to those things every once in a while. And I did go out once with a medical student. It was a lot of fun. We went to Taco Bell. We got in a car accident on the way back, and it was nighttime. We were standing on the side of the road, and I was like, oh man, this is bad. So I didn't go out again, and that was sort of the end of my free time in Shayla. But the other majority of my time I spent in the National Hospital Labor and Delivery Unit. I met a doctor when I was in Guatemala my senior year of high school. She took care of me when I got sick all the time with parasites and other bacterial infections, and so she knew me really well. And I asked Dr. Wyman and Dr. Newhouse, hey, could I maybe shadow a doctor in Guatemala? And they're like, sure. So I emailed her, and I asked her, and she was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And I was like, do you need paperwork? And she was like, nope, you're good, just show up. And I was like, awesome. So I showed up in Guatemala, and I worked in the labor and delivery unit, and I would be there whenever the doctor was there. Some days it was 6 hours, some days it was 8 hours, some days it was more than that. I just never really knew how long I was going to be there. Some healthcare differences between the United States and Guatemala, I can't cover even if I had all day to talk to you about them because they're very, very vast and very, very different. But just a few brief things. Medical school, the students that I was working with were my age. So you go to high school, which you can finish when you're 16, 17, or 18, depending on how quickly you do it. And they have all these different routes to do high school. But then you go straight to medical school, and it's 5 years long. You spend 2 years doing like book studies, and then you go straight into the hospital in your 3rd year. So they're basically like juniors in college here, doing C-sections, doing surgeries, delivering babies, doing all of the healthcare basically on their own. There was one attending physician for labor and delivery. She was the doctor I worked with, but she was also in charge of like all the students, all the other aspects of the hospital. So she was like, I rarely actually worked with her. I normally work with medical students. And so healthcare in Guatemala is free. So the medical students have to work for free for the government, so you don't necessarily have quality healthcare. And so sanitation is very different. It's not like here at all. It's very dirty. I went through a thing of hand sanitizer, typically a whole bottle in a week. But just to give you a little bit of an idea without being too disgusting or anything, I was in labor and delivery. Every single patient we saw was either pregnant or just had a baby or something. So we were doing a lot of vaginal exams, a lot of cervical exams. And the doctor would see 13 to 14 patients without washing their hands. Yeah, your doctor won't, the first thing he'll do when he walks in your room is wash his hands. And then before he leaves, he'll wash his hands. So there was no hand washing. There was also, in terms of the beds, they wouldn't sanitize the beds in between patients. Like, you'd get up and the next person would lay down. Sometimes they'd give you the same blanket because they didn't have any more. And the expectations of the staff was not quite as high. The doctor I would work with, sometimes she'd show up 2 hours late and I'd be standing on the side of a 4-lane highway waiting for her to pick me up. And I'd just stand there and wait and wait and wait, and she'd come late, and it was just not a big deal at all. So here's a few pictures just to give you an idea of sanitation, but the one on the left is the OR. So we had a heart rate monitor, we didn't use it. So the anesthesiologist would come in, give the mom an epidural, and leave. We wouldn't hook her up to the heart rate monitor. They wouldn't watch. They wouldn't monitor anything. The students would scrub in the room up there on the top, if they scrubbed in at all. Sometimes I saw them just go straight in without washing their hands. And they would do surgery. And then the bottom picture is just of a stretcher, and it was very common for there to be just dirty sheets laying on stretchers. That would be there Monday and Tuesday, and they'd probably be there Wednesday still too before it got cleaned up. And something I just want to say is they're not doing this because they don't care. They're doing it because the government's corrupt and they don't have the resources that they need. They're not being provided the funds that they need. They're out of medications. They're out of the stock of the basic materials that they need to provide quality health care. So the doctors are doing their best with what they have, but this is the best that they have. So overall highs of being in the hospital, I was able to see 50 births. I was able to be right in the room, right next to the mom. In one of the births, I was actually able to help. I didn't do any sutures. I didn't do any pokes. I didn't really touch any patient except for this one. I did do blood pressure and heart rate, and the doctor taught me how to locate the fetal position and measure the altura, which is the height from the bottom of the uterus to the top. But one time I actually got to help with a delivery was when the baby was stuck in the birth canal, and the mom was refusing to push. She was done. She was tired. They don't get drugs, so they're exhausted by the end. And so she was refusing to push. The doctors were worried about the baby. And there's no one in the room, so they asked me if I would link arms with them across the mom's table and just pull down with all my body weight and help to force the baby out because they don't have any other way of getting the baby out. So that was one time I actually got to help, which was really cool. But I also was able to see things that you never see in the United States. The first one is pseudodosis, which I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I talked to Dr. Darling about it, and so we had a patient come in. She was like, I'm 8 months pregnant, just want to see you before I have my baby. So we did her blood pressure, we measured her altura, she looked pregnant. So the doctor was having us figure out the position of the baby. So she had the 2 medical students go, and then she had me go, and then we were all like, we don't feel the baby, we can't figure it out. And she was like, that's because there is no baby. There was no fetal heart rate. We did an ultrasound. The lady was not pregnant. And so Sadoisis is a psychological disorder where you basically convince yourself you're pregnant to such an extent that your body responds as if you are pregnant. And a lot of these women, the symptoms don't go away until they go through labor. So whatever that means, I don't know. The doctor that I worked with just told her, you're not pregnant, here's your ultrasound, there's no baby, go home. So she just went home. We don't know what happened to her. Another thing that I got to see was anencephaly, which is a birth defect in which the neural tube does not close entirely. So either the brain is not completely formed or it's exposed when the baby's born. So I have a cartoon image of it. It's not like a real picture. If you want to see a real picture, they are online, and you can see them. But the baby that was born with this died 10 minutes after birth. So that was difficult to see. But Sadoisis happens in about 3 in 10,000 births in the United States. And so it was on my 2nd or 3rd day there that I actually saw a baby born with this disorder. And so while it was a really sad moment to watch the baby take its first breath and then watch him take his last breath just 10 minutes later, I was able to see something that I maybe never would have seen in the United States in all practicing medicine. So that was really unique. Overall lows, there was a lack of respect for patients. The medical students were oftentimes reckless with the patient's life. They would go in, I'd be working with one student for a few hours and she'd be like, oh, do you want to do charting? And I'd say, sure. And she'd be like, well, I would be like, where's your list with the vitals? Because they would keep track of it on little pieces of paper. And she'd be like, well, I haven't checked on the patient for 4 hours, but just do vitals within the average normal range, it'll be fine. And I would just look at them like, you haven't checked on a patient in labor and delivery for 4 hours. Like, how do you even know they're okay? And another example of this, I was standing in the hospital one day, like just observing what was going on around me, and a patient called me over to their bed, and they were like, something's not right, like I don't feel right. And I was like, let me go get a student, like I can't help you, I'm not a doctor. So I went and got a student, and I told the student that the patient needed help, something wasn't right. And the student was like, okay, I got it, I'll go check on her. And I was like, okay. He's like, but I got to do this first. And I was like, okay, but something's wrong with her. And he was like, okay. And 20 minutes later, the doctor I was working with called me away for something, and I came back 20 minutes later, and they were trying to resuscitate this woman because she had bled out, and she was severely bleeding. They couldn't stop it, and so they rushed her into the OR. And I don't know what happened. I went home shortly after that happened, but the student never went back to her, and that's very common. Patients just sort of get forgotten about, which was really hard to watch and to see. A lot of the people in labor were 13, 14, 15-year-old girls. They don't even know. Some of them would be like, what's wrong with me? I was like, you're having a baby. And they'd be like, what do you mean I'm having a baby? Like, they didn't understand at all. So that was really hard to see, and then to have medical students who didn't care to look at the patient when they were talking to them. They'd sit on their cell phones, who would sit on the patient's beds and talk, even though this woman's in labor and she's going through a very hard process physically, and they just don't even care enough to let her rest in her bed peacefully. Another hard thing was death. I saw a lot of babies pass away. I saw quite a few mothers pass away. And there's not a lot of respect for a person after they pass away. There was one time where they asked the family to go and get a bucket. They put the baby in a bucket, taped it up, and set it on the table and let it go. There was another time they wrapped the baby in a blanket, put tape around it, and left it on a stretcher all day. And that's something you just had to walk past repeatedly. So here's a few pictures of labor and delivery. We had 4 beds in delivery. So that was where patients could actually labor. We had 2 beds in the emergency, which is where they could come in and we'd evaluate them and say, no, you're not in labor, or yes, you are, you need to stay. And then we had 3 delivery beds. But most days we had 18 patients. So either way, we didn't have enough beds. So So we would put them on stretchers in between all the patients, and then if you had to check someone, you had to move all the beds to get to one person and move them all back. We would have them in the hallways, and then for any patient that we didn't have a stretcher for, we put them in a plastic chair that you would like have at like a campfire, and they'd have to sit down the hallway holding up their IV bags until a bed opened up. And some of them would sit there all day before they had a bed. And so like one day we had patients laboring in the delivery room, which was very interesting because then when someone was fully dilated, we'd be like, quick, get up, and we'd make that patient get up and the fully dilated patient get up and walk into that room and get on that bed, and they just switch beds, like without washing anything down. So it was very crazy to watch every single day how they would try to run the hospital with their lack of resources. Here's a few more pictures. So the top one is of just a bunch of the medical students that I worked with. Like, even though they sometimes didn't do things that were logical or that made sense or that were in the best interest of the patient, I absolutely loved working with them, getting to know them, hear their stories. With most of them, I'm friends with them on Facebook. We still talk all the time. I actually had the doctor I worked with email me the other day asking me when I was coming back down and hoping I was done with medical school so I could come work with her. So they are like people I've built bonds with that I don't think will ever go away. The big picture is of a delivery that I was in. Those are two medical students that were delivering the baby, and they were arguing about which way they should do certain parts of the delivery because neither of them had done it before and they were unsure, and they were like, you do it this way, no, you do it this way. And that was common, and I'd stand there and be like, I have no idea. And they'd be like, but you're an American, what do I do? And I was like, I don't know. So that was a phrase that I said very often, was just like, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, and they just didn't understand that. But then the bottom picture is of a baby right after he was born. And one of the funny things is they think that babies are always very cold. I don't know why. It's warm there, it's tropical. Even though we're up in the mountains, here it's still pretty hot. But they think they're cold. They wrap them up in lots of layers, put them in blankets, and they have heaters going in labor and delivery, which is a perfect place for germs. But my first day, I was like, oh, hospitals in the States are always cold. I'm going to wear my pants, I'm going to wear a long sleeve shirt with a cardigan, and then my lab coat. And that's what I wore, and I walked into labor and delivery, and it was like a heat wave hit me, and I was like, oh, it's hot in here. But I didn't want to ask right away to go to the bathroom and start taking off some of my layers because I had nowhere to put them. So I started going, and we were doing rounds, and I'm standing there, and I am just getting I'm sweating, and I'm lightheaded. I'm like, I am gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass out. And about 2 hours in, I just hit the floor, and I sat down, and all the doctors came around me, and they're like, what's wrong? I was like, I'm just hot. I'm really, really hot. And they're like, no, something's wrong. I was like, no, I'm warm. Get me something to get all these clothes off of me. But they just didn't understand that. So it was very hot every day. And the rest of the time, I wore a tank top under my lab coat just so I could have some air because it was just really hot. But overall, it was an absolutely incredible experience. I learned so much about healthcare. I learned so much about what I want to do in the future. I still want to do medical missions, but I realized that I can go into Guatemala and I can help 50 patients a day and see them, but that's not going to change the healthcare. That's not really helping the community. It's hurting it more so. What I desire to do more is to go back to Guatemala and help train the doctors, help them learn how to do things properly, help them to understand better ways to take care of patients. So I want to thank Dr. Wyman and Dr. Newhouse for supporting me through the entire thing and dealing with my emails and my emotional breakdowns and everything else that came with it. It was a very emotional journey. It still is. I'm still trying to figure out why certain things happened or why I was there and why I couldn't help. So it's been incredible, and I'm so grateful for it. So if anyone has any questions. Yes, they use a lot of midwives, but their midwives are not trained like ours are.
What percentage do you have any idea?
I have it in a paper that I wrote for Dr. Newhouse, and I could look, but I don't remember right off the top of my head. It's pretty high, but a lot of them go very poorly, so a lot of the patients coming into labor and delivery have already been with a midwife who has sort of messed up the whole process or done things wrong, so the moms are in critical state when they come in. Sometimes the babies are breech, and the midwives are like, no, they're not, and we're like, yes, they are. And we would do an ultrasound, and they'd be like, oh yeah, they're breech.
Second question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what a curandero is?
The what?
Curandero.
Mm-mm.
It's like a witch doctor.
Oh, comadrona.
Oh, okay, different word.
Yeah.
Different word. Do they use like vocabulary?
I'm not sure. It's like, yeah. The comadronas do basically whatever they want, and they do like weird spices and things like that. Just, we don't know. The doctors aren't huge fans of them and don't prefer their assistants. Thing. Yeah. Mhm. Right. It was a lot of more like the city-ish people, but the majority of the indigenous people that we did have had already been with the comadrona. So they were the patients that came in and typically went right into an emergency C-section or didn't make it because they were in bad conditions from where they were coming from. But we did have a good number of indigenous women come in who couldn't speak Spanish. They spoke Quiche, and so I did learn like a few little things that I probably couldn't remember or say correctly because it was a very weird language. But we did see quite a few of them.